Right now, somewhere in this country, a person you have never spoken to is thinking about a decision. They don't know your name, they've never seen your face, but something about their next choice is going to change your life. And they don't even know it yet. That's not a coincidence. That's how God has always worked. If you've been waiting on a breakthrough that hasn't come, if you've prayed the same prayers so many times you've lost count of the tears, I want you to hear something before we go any further. Your prayer didn't disappear into silence. It landed somewhere, and it's already being answered. Just not through the door you've been watching. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the wait made sense. There's a story in 1 Kings about a prophet named Elijah, sitting by a brook, completely dependent on ravens bringing him food. When the brook dried up, God didn't send Elijah back to familiar territory. He sent him to a foreign town, to a widow he had never met. A woman who was, by her own words, preparing her last meal before she and her son expected to die of starvation. She didn't know Elijah was coming. Elijah didn't know her name until he arrived. But God had already spoken to her heart before he ever spoke to Elijah's feet. I have commanded a widow there to supply you with food, God told him, before she'd agreed to anything. Read that again. God secured her obedience before the need was ever spoken out loud. That's what's happening right now, somewhere, for you. Scripture says in Isaiah, "Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear." Not after, before. Which means the person carrying your next provision, your next opportunity, your next open door, may already be feeling a nudge they can't explain. An unusual thought about helping a stranger. A name that keeps surfacing in their mind. A decision to say yes to something inconvenient for reasons they can't articulate. You don't need 1,000 people to notice you. You need the one person God already assigned. And that assignment was given before your waiting season even started. But let's be honest about the part that hurts. The waiting itself. Before Moses ever stood in front of Pharaoh, he spent 40 years herding sheep in the wilderness, invisible, forgotten by the empire that once knew his name. Before John the Baptist ever preached to crowds, he lived in the desert. Before Paul became the apostle who would shape half the New Testament, he disappeared into Arabia for 3 years that Scripture barely mentions. None of them got to skip the quiet, and neither will you. Here's what nobody tells you about a season like this. Silence from people is not the same as silence from God. 1 Kings 19 tells us that after Elijah's greatest victory, he collapsed in exhaustion and fear, and God didn't show up in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He showed up in what Scripture calls a gentle whisper. Not a spectacle, a whisper. The kind you can only hear when everything loud has been stripped away. If your life feels unusually quiet right now, if the invitations stopped coming and you don't know why, consider that maybe you're not being punished. Maybe you're being tuned. Maybe the noise had to go so you could learn what God's voice actually sounds like before He introduces you to the person who's about to change everything. Tell me in the comments, has there been a season where the silence taught you something you couldn't have learned any other way? I read every one of these, and your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to see today. Here's where a lot of us miss it though. We're watching for help to arrive in a certain shape, and God rarely uses the shape we're picturing. In Acts 10, a Roman centurion named Cornelius, a Gentile, an outsider to everything the early Jewish believers understood about faith, had an angel appear to him and tell him to send for a man named Peter. At the very same hour, miles away, Peter was on a rooftop having a vision that would completely dismantle everything he thought he knew about who God could use and who God could reach. 2 men from 2 different worlds, being prepared at the same time for a meeting neither of them planned. Peter almost refused to go. The instructions didn't match his expectations. But when he finally listened, an entire new chapter of the faith opened up. One that included people he never imagined God would use. Or look at Abigail in 1 Samuel 25, a woman married to a foolish, arrogant man who rode out on her own initiative to prevent a disaster and ended up changing the trajectory of David's future. Nobody sent her. Nobody expected her. She simply recognized a moment and moved. The person God is sending toward you might not look like a mentor, might not talk like your church, might come from a background that surprises you. Your job was never to approve the packaging. It's to stay awake enough to recognize the purpose underneath it. Now when that help finally arrives, and it will, there's one more thing worth saying honestly. Gratitude is right. Reverence isn't. The person God uses to bless you is a vessel, not the well. James chapter 1 says every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father, meaning the hands that deliver it are borrowed, not the origin. If your peace depends on that person never changing, never leaving, never disappointing you, you've quietly shifted your worship from the giver to the gift. Corrie ten Boom, hidden by strangers during one of history's darkest periods, later spent her life saying that no matter how dark the valley, God was already there before she arrived in it, including in the people who risked everything to hide her family. She honored them deeply, but she never confused the courage of the helper with the faithfulness of the one who sent them. That's the posture worth carrying into whatever comes next for you. Deep, genuine thanks for the person, and unshaken trust in the God who moved them. So here's where I want to leave you. If you've been waiting, the waiting was never wasted. If you felt forgotten, you weren't. Somewhere, a decision is being made on your behalf by someone you haven't even met, and it was set in motion long before you started watching for it. Ecclesiastes says there's a time for everything under heaven. This is simply a season, not a sentence. And Philippians chapter 1 promises that the one who began a good work in you will carry it through to completion. Stay ready. Stay soft. Keep your eyes open, not for the packaging, but for the purpose. If this spoke to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell me below, has God ever used someone you least expected to answer a prayer you'd almost given up on? Name them. Your story might be the exact encouragement someone else needs to keep believing today.